for the sermon title. It's like how I get there. It's not always the same process. This week, I suppose that we have to be aware that water figures pretty heavily in the scriptures when we're talking about being saved from a flood, that all creation is in the midst of God's wrath. So the ark built to save animals and people, and then the promise from God that the water won't be the way they'll suffer again. Those who were in bondage in Egypt, they had experience with God's way with water when the Red Sea parted and allowed them to pass. The Red Sea, or the Reed Sea, just like the Jordan River, not so deep and not so wide, neither is that Red Sea that they crossed. It might have been the Reed Sea, but still there was God's saving power to help them escape, and then God's wisdom put them into a wilderness of wandering for many years. But this flood that came, that gave the warning, the forewarning for Noah to build that ark, to do something that would be a miraculous feat in that time, but to do something that would also be saving for human beings and the animals of creation. And then that promise, that act, that something that it would be visible so that human beings would notice it, that rainbow, the ark, so that God's promise not to destroy that way again would be in their minds, that covenant made. When we're looking at this now, so many years later, I mean, the way language has changed, the way we even use the words or the lessons of these scriptures. Some of our favorite stories, maybe when you were in Sunday school, because I'm assuming folks were in Sunday school. I mean, you can't assume I was, because I didn't come to Christ till I was in my 20s. But were you in Sunday school and you had stories of Jonah and the whale and Noah and the flood and the ark and the animals? Who did? Hands. And so, like, we all love the animals. We're so happy for the animals. We're happy for the rainbow, and we like rainbows, and we like the colors. And now in this culture, that rainbow can mean something completely different than what was intended perhaps in this biblical story, but we still use that as a sign of promise and hope. And it means something. It might mean something different to some than to others, but we're often in that place where we'll misunderstand, or we'll misrepresent, or we'll misappropriate even God's very prominent symbols. But this is the way to save creation. And God promised that the flood won't be the way that humanity would be destroyed. But God has not yet promised that something else might not. So we're in that place of the water in the Gospel of Mark. And look at how the Gospel of Mark, we're at the beginning yet of Jesus' ministry. And we've been in Mark for a few weeks, and I don't know while I was gone if Pastor Howard had preached on Epiphany, if he preached on the baptism, but this is that moment in Mark where that is a prominent way of saying that this is the beginning of Jesus' ministry. And so there's that moment of expectation and a moment of drama, that there's the Spirit resting on, like him, as a dove. And this is where, in that moment where something really miraculous and beautiful and awesome has happened, then there's also that Spirit, some Spirit driving Jesus into the wilderness. Driving Jesus into a wilderness of sin and trouble and trial and temptation and the evils that would be bombarding him for 40 days that he must withstand. And these are the 40 days of Lent that we celebrate and that we practice and that we participate in so that we can be, I suppose, enlivened or encouraged to get our way to the cross and then to Easter. Wilderness. I'm such a weenie, I don't do wilderness. I just don't. I don't like to be cold, so I don't go knowingly into the wilderness. I swear, I don't even want to go on a hike if it means that if it's, I told you, if it's a grade and I see a warning sign that says, okay, it's hot out here and this is a 3-mile hike and you better have enough water with you, I chicken out immediately. And wilderness, to go on a mountain willingly and throw myself down on something, some slender little slats of boards, like the 2x4s they're using to reinforce my basement, not a chance. Wilderness. It looks like wilderness when you're driving on the road today. Some folks are hunkered down in the wilderness of town, and we have electricity and lights. Wilderness. This is where Jesus went willingly, but went for us to withstand certain forces and almost to practice. It made me think about, and it's an old movie, but did anybody ever see the movie that had Anthony Hopkins, Alec Baldwin, Elle Macpherson, the cool model, called The Edge? The Edge. It's a long time ago. It's long enough that I think my son was in high school when a scary moment made me unhinge my jaw and scream in his ear. And he truly was so embarrassed because even though it was dark, it was his mama. My husband had left to go get something, a soda, and it's dark, and this scary point in the movie, it took me a while. So I could tell Kevin wanted to slink down, but it frightened me. And then it was just a moment where there was a bear skin over a person, and they were jokingly trying to scare the person who was the intended scaree. But of course, those in the theater, not all quite as vocal as I, but we were scared. But yet in this movie, there was a possibility to go by float plane into the wilderness. So Alec Baldwin and Anthony Hopkins went into the wilderness, floating with technology, and then they went down. And the pilot was in the plane as they went down. And as they went down, I remember this because there was this moment of my theology and thinking, don't do that. Don't ever do that. It's not, don't ever crash. It's not that. You don't always have that control. You don't always have that say-so. But as the float plane was going down, and of course the stars of the movie, Alec Baldwin and Anthony Hopkins, the very rich husband and the interloping, philandering, cheating boyfriend of the wife, they were surviving, but as they went down and the float plane crashed, the pilot was uttering curses. Last words said were the equivalent of beep, 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 beep. And it was the kind of thing where I definitely heard it before. But I thought to myself in the darkness of that theater, that's not the way you want to go to meet your Creator. With those words on your lips, and then present yourself to God. He died. And then, of course, the movie continues. But they're in the wilderness. And in the wilderness, I'm going to be referring to this movie again because in this movie, if you get a chance to find it on Netflix or something, there are all those possibilities where you can break every single commandment ever given to Moses, ever given to faithful people, ever given to all of us, and we know what's civilized and what's not. But in that movie, The Edge, that wilderness was the trial to save their heat, conserve their body energy to be found, to be still alive the next day. All of that, it was like, that's practice like Jesus did on our behalf in the wilderness. But the practice of being in the wilderness and being in those places where he was tempted, and we have more stories about the temptations for power and for fame and for maybe that kind of infamy or the kind of celebrity. That's not why Jesus came. But in this wilderness that we go through also, that's our daily life in modern times, we still have some of those issues, that we still have some of those things that we're having to worry about, we're having to withstand, just as Jesus did. And our wilderness may look a little different. It may not be the desert out in Judea. It may not be scrubby cactus. It may not be the wilderness in Alaska. But still, in this time, we know, because we watch the news and we see the horror, that there is still wilderness that we have to go through, and we have to do something about it. Or else, not only are we lost, but so is everything that we value. So Jesus went through this time of wilderness, and we'll do that too, knowing that it's worth it, because God created all of us. God created this world, God created the animals, God created us in God's own image so that we could do something good about it. But Jesus went through this time in the wilderness because he was on the march toward Jerusalem. He would have to withstand all kinds of social and political, economic, and even theological forces that were already standing against him. His own colleagues, his own clergy colleague types, the rabbis, the different Jewish sects of those that were trying to be faithful, when Jesus was pushing them to be more faithful, more transparent, more as God would have wanted them to be, he faced their scorn and eventually their fury. But all of that, the political, economic, religious forces, those are still at play today. They're still in play, and we have to do something about it. And so this means we will be, like we promised for our Ash Wednesday service, to be more engaged in mission, to give more, to be with people who can't get out, to be more prayerful, to be more intentional in our giving and our doing. All of this is because we have this example of Jesus the Christ. And so when I say pour it on, or go for it, or just do it, what's the it? What is the it? What's the it? Faith, love, God's will, a change, a better, hopeful universe. We'll go for it. But that means that we have to, in all of our efforts, we have to pour it on. We have to know that the time, we have no idea how much time we've got, so we have to do everything we can for everyone we can, for as long as we can, just like Wesley always said. For everyone, we'll do all that we can, for as many as we can, for as long as we can. So help us God through the wilderness. Here we go.